A woman left her work and vanished without a trace under strange circumstances. Police joined the search and quickly uncovered several chilling clues suggesting something terrible might have happened to her. But despite their efforts, the investigation dragged on for 25 long years, and only recently did an unexpected breakthrough finally reveal the shocking truth. Kim Langwell was born on December 24, 1965, in Houston, Texas. She grew up there with her parents and sister, surrounded by friends, and was known for her determination from a young age. At the age of 18, Kim gave birth to her daughter Tiffany, but shortly after Tiffany's father left them, so Kim had to raise her daughter on her own. She moved to a town called Beaumont, hoping to start fresh and build a stable life for herself and Tiffany. At first, it wasn't easy. Kim often had to juggle 3 jobs at once just to make ends meet. But eventually, she landed a good position at a local oil refinery, which gave her more time to focus on her daughter. At this job, Kim also met a man named Ken. The two started dating, and before long, they got engaged, excited to plan their future together. On July 9th, 1999, 34-year-old Kim had plans to spend the evening at a restaurant with Ken and her 15-year-old daughter, Tiffany. That day, she was scheduled to finish her shift at work around 5 p.m., head home, and then go to the restaurant. At around 5:15, Kim called Tiffany to tell her about those plans. She also mentioned that she had some things to do before heading home and might be a little late. By 6:30, Kim arrived at her house, but Kim, for some reason, still wasn't there. He and Tiffany tried calling her, but she didn't answer, which was quite unusual for her. As the hours passed with no sign of Kim, Ken became increasingly worried. Finally, at around 10 p.m., he decided to search for her. He drove along the route Kim would have taken from work to home, checked local stores, and stopped by other places she might have been, but there was no trace of her anywhere. Ken kept searching until he spotted Kim's car parked outside a pharmacy, but Kim herself was nowhere to be found. He looked around the area, hoping to find her, but there was no sign of her anywhere near the pharmacy. At first, Ken thought maybe she had changed her mind about dinner and gone somewhere else. It crossed his mind that she could have left with her friend and decided to leave her car there, even though it didn't make much sense to him. Still, he convinced himself that she was probably fine and headed home. The next morning, Ken drove back to the pharmacy and saw that Kim's car was still sitting in the parking lot. She also hadn't come home overnight and hadn't contacted anyone. At that point, his worry turned into fear. Realizing something was seriously wrong, Ken decided to call the police. After hearing all of this, the officers immediately got to work. Their first step was to examine Kim's car. There were no signs of a struggle or blood inside, but they did find something unsettling. Her cell phone was left behind. Next, they spoke with Kim's daughter, Tiffany, who had been the last person to speak with her. Tiffany explained that after work, her mom had planned to stop by the house of a man named Terry, with whom she'd been in a relationship for 7 years. Even though they had broken up over 6 months earlier, Terry still kept in touch with Kim from time to time. That evening, he asked her to help him with a repair project. He needed someone to hold a few shelves while he mounted them to the wall. Tiffany said she called Terry on the night her mom disappeared, but he told her Kim had only stopped by for a few minutes and left. When the police spoke with Kim's friends, they learned that her relationship with Terry had been anything but smooth. At first, when Kim started dating him, her friends thought he seemed like a decent guy. But that impression didn't last long. Over time, Terry's behavior became more aggressive and controlling. He constantly called Kim, demanding to know where she was and who she was with. He insisted that she obey him and frequently called arguments over the smallest things. Eventually, Kim decided to end the relationship, but breaking up with Terry wasn't easy. He tried to stop her in every way possible. Sometimes he promised to change, and other times he threatened to hurt her if she left him. Despite his efforts, Kim finally managed to walk away. After that, Terry didn't do anything crazy to get her back, but he continued to stay in contact with her. Kim was afraid to completely cut him off, worrying that if she did, he might harm her or her daughter. From conversations with Kim's friends, police uncovered even darker details about her relationship with Terry. Shortly before their breakup, he had become physically violent, even going as far as choking her during an argument. After that incident, Kim became genuinely afraid that one day Terry might take things even further. At one point, she confided in her friends, saying that if she ever disappeared, they should start looking for her in Terry's backyard. All this information, combined with the fact that Kim had visited Terry shortly before she vanished, made investigators take a hard look at him as a possible suspect. But when they questioned Terry, he denied any involvement in her disappearance. He told police that Kim had only stopped by for a few minutes to help him mount the shelves and left. Terry also claimed that about 4 hours after Kim's visit, he went to a local bar and spent the rest of the evening there. This meant Terry had no alibi for the time Kim went missing, and his motive seemed clear. Investigators got a warrant to search his home and combed through his property, but they found nothing. No trace of Kim, no belongings, no blood. Nothing to link Terry to her disappearance. Forensic experts also examined Kim's car but didn't find any clues either. In the end, police couldn't uncover any evidence linking Terry to her disappearance, or anything that could explain what happened to Kim. But soon, a new suspect entered the picture. Kim's friends revealed that she had repeatedly complained about her boss, Frank. Not long after she started working for him, Frank began showing her unwanted attention. He openly flirted with her despite being married. As time went on, Frank began writing her love letters, trying to convince her to start a relationship with him. In total, he sent more than 100 letters. The whole situation made Kim uneasy. She was afraid Frank might fire her one day just because she didn't feel the same way. In fact, Kim had been so uneasy about the situation that she gave all of Frank's letters to her close friends, asking them to hold on to them in case anything ever happened to her. The police reviewed Frank's letters, and their content made it clear he was completely obsessed with Kim. On top of that, Kim had confided in her friends that Frank would slowly drive past her house several times a day. Sometimes he'd even park across the street and just watch her. What made the situation even more bizarre was that Kim's current boyfriend also worked at the same company, but that didn't seem to bother Frank at all. Given all this, investigators began seriously considering Frank as a suspect. Kim had vanished shortly after leaving work, and Frank had more than one motive for doing something like that. First, his obsession with her could have escalated to the point where he decided to abduct her. Second, he may have feared that Kim might expose him either to their employer or to his wife. Either scenario could have caused him serious trouble, giving him a strong reason to silence her. Police decided to question Frank, but he claimed he didn't have any strong feelings for Kim, describing it as nothing more than a fleeting crush that had long passed. He also denied writing her any letters, despite the fact that investigators had all of them in their possession. Frank's behavior struck the detectives as odd, and they weren't quick to take him at his word. He also claimed to have an alibi, but that raised even more questions. Frank provided a receipt from a store showing he'd been there at 6:56 p.m. However, in theory, he still had enough time to abduct Kim before that. Later that evening, Frank hosted a poker game with some friends who confirmed he was with them during that time, but there was still a window of over an hour between the time Kim left work and when Frank's alibi kicked in, a period for which he had no explanation. Despite their efforts, the police couldn't find any evidence linking Frank to Kim's disappearance, so they shifted their focus to other potential leads. Investigators tried to locate surveillance footage from cameras along Kim's route from her home to Terry's house and then to the parking lot where her car was found, but this effort yielded no results. They also reviewed her phone records and discovered that her last call had been to her daughter, with no further activity afterward. The detectives then concentrated on search efforts, scouring the city and its outskirts. Volunteers joined in, and police made a public appeal, asking anyone with information to come forward. Yet despite these efforts, they made no progress. At the same time, more reports about Terry's odd behavior started to surface. Just days after Kim's disappearance, her sister decided to confront him at his home, as both she and the rest of Kim's family strongly suspected him. However, Terry appeared not only indifferent to Kim's fate, but went as far as openly mocking her relatives, showing no sign of concern for the missing woman. Another interesting observation came from Terry's employees. He owned a small business and his office was located on his property, so his workers frequently came by. One of them reported that on the day Kim disappeared, he arrived at Terry's house around 5:50 p.m., and Kim's car was parked outside. However, he didn't see Kim herself. Considering that Kim had left work around 5:15 p.m., this raised some serious questions. Terry had claimed that she only stopped by for a few minutes, but his employee's account clearly contradicted that. Soon after, the police received another lead. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a tow truck owned by Terry near the parking lot where Kim's car was eventually found. According to them, the tow truck was there at around 6:45 p.m., which didn't align with Terry's alibi of being home all evening. Despite these suspicious details, there still wasn't any solid evidence linking Terry to Kim's disappearance. Investigators kept searching for more clues, but ultimately, the case would drag on for years. Kim's family never stopped believing that Terry was responsible for her disappearance, and by then, no one held out hope that she would be found alive. Her sister also told police that Terry continued acting strangely. At one point, he called them and said he was planning to take a polygraph test to clear his name, but then he casually added that he would probably fail it. On top of that, Terry occasionally called the family to ask if they had heard from Kim, as if she had simply gone away for a while instead of vanishing without a trace. And if that wasn't unsettling enough, someone had been calling Kim's relatives for years, only to stay silent on the other end of the line. The family was convinced Terry was behind it, but once again, the police couldn't find anything to tie him to Kim's disappearance. 3 years later, another strange incident involving Terry raised suspicions again. He approached Tiffany on the street and started asking if she had heard anything from her mother. Kim's sister stepped in and told him to leave. In response, Terry said something like, "Aren't you curious about which polygraph question I failed? It was the one where they asked if I killed Kim." Kim's family immediately contacted the police again, but their response was the same, without solid evidence. They couldn't confirm Terry's involvement. From that point on, the case completely stalled. 8 years later, investigators reopened it and reviewed everything from scratch, but it led nowhere. Terry, by then, had stopped cooperating with the authorities and flat out refused to answer any more questions. This went on for many years, until early 2024, when the Oxygen True Crime documentary team took an interest in Kim's case. They decided to create an episode about her disappearance and launch their own investigation. They interviewed Kim's friends and family before turning their attention to the two main suspects, Frank and Terry. But even 25 years after Kim's disappearance, his behavior was still quite unusual. He continued to deny ever pursuing Kim romantically or writing her love letters. Once again, he insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance. With little progress, the team shifted their focus to Terry. Unlike Frank, Terry refused to speak with them, but they didn't give up and decided to confront him in person. When they arrived at his house, Terry saw them through a window and immediately ran out the back door, apparently trying to escape in his car. Unfortunately for him, the crew blocked his path, leaving Terry no choice but to answer their questions. He claimed he hadn't seen them and wasn't trying to run, even though his actions suggested the opposite. Terry then insisted he had no reason to harm Kim, saying he wasn't bothered at all by her leaving him. This directly contradicted what Kim's friends and family had told investigators. She had often mentioned threats and erratic behavior from Terry. Things took an even stranger turn when Terry began contradicting his own original statements. Initially, he told police that Kim had stopped by to help him put up shelves. Now he claimed she'd only come to pick up the rest of her belongings from his house. The contradiction caught the attention of investigators, prompting them to reopen the case. After the documentary aired, prosecutors decided to take a bold step. They prepared to charge Terry with murder, even though they still lacked solid evidence tying him directly to Kim's disappearance. Almost no one doubted his involvement by this point. Investigators hoped that, during the trial, new evidence would surface or that the jury would find Terry's suspicious behavior enough to convict him. However, just as prosecutors were finalizing their case, something unexpected happened. A witness came forward after watching the documentary, and their testimony changed everything. According to this individual, Terry had once told him that he had killed his ex-girlfriend and buried her body on his property. With this new information, police secured a warrant to search Terry's property and arrived with a team of forensic experts. For days, dozens of people combed through the area using high-level ground-penetrating radars. Finally, they made a breakthrough. The radar revealed a section of the concrete floor beneath Terry's bedroom that was about the size of a human body. Pieces of rebar had been cut out of this spot, even though the rest of the foundation was fully reinforced. Investigators began digging and soon uncovered a blanket buried in the ground. Inside, they found human remains. These remains were sent to forensic experts, who quickly confirmed what everyone had already suspected: the remains belonged to Kim. Right after this discovery, Terry was arrested and charged with murder. With Kim's body now found beneath his bedroom, the prosecution finally had the evidence they needed to secure a conviction. As of now, 67-year-old Terry remains in jail awaiting his trial, which is scheduled for the spring of 2025. In addition to the criminal charges, Kim's daughter has filed a civil lawsuit against him, seeking compensation and aiming to strip Terry of the financial means to fund his defense in the criminal case. It's worth noting that following Terry's arrest, the original investigative team faced heavy criticism. As we know, Kim had told her friends that if she ever went missing, they should look for her on Terry's property. And 25 years later, her body was found exactly where she said it would be. To this day, it's unclear why Terry's house and property weren't thoroughly searched back then. Perhaps investigators did check the yard but found no signs of recent digging. It's also unknown when exactly Terry buried her under his bedroom. It's possible he initially hid her body elsewhere and only moved it under the house after police had completed their initial search. Regardless, Terry now has almost no chance of escaping justice, and Kim's family has finally been able to give her a proper burial. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.